The way I've been doing this is to use buckets full of coconut coir, root the cuttings in them, and then get the cuttings started up inside my coffee and allow the orchids to grow through the coffee plants. They are an epiphytic orchid, and so they have these aerial roots like this right here that attach to just about everything. They wrap all over the place. Today what I'd like to do is go in, get some cuttings off the vanilla orchids, propagate them, and then transplant some of the cuttings that I did earlier. First I have to seek and harvest some healthy looking vanilla orchid cuttings. We've got some good looking shoots back here. I'm going to take this one. It's heading off in the wrong direction. Now, one thing you want to be sure of, the sap on these is rather acrid. It will burn the skin, okay? So don't come in contact with the sap. This one's a pretty nice cutting. It already has some aerial roots going. It's going to be real easy to grow. I got a few here heading for the treetops. That looks like a good one. Take that. Oh, here's a good one. And see, I make several out of this. So I'm going to go ahead and take it off right there. That gives us a really nice long cutting. Here I am in the potting shed at the bench. I've got a couple of buckets here that I'm going to use for propagating the orchids. You'll see that I've got copper tape around the outside. That's supposed to keep the slugs out of here so they don't chew up my cuttings. Inside the buckets, I'm filled about halfway with a combination of high porosity Pro Mix, which is perlite, peat moss, and so on, and a rather large chunk of coconut husk or cocoa coir. This is a pretty good medium for orchids. It's soilless. It doesn't have any diseases in it. There's no weeds, and so it should work out pretty well. I've used it before for this purpose. And then the next thing I have to do is select my cuttings. I'm going to go for cuttings that are probably about 6 to 8 inches long. All right, and so this one is around double that. I want to try to make these so that I have a stem sticking down at the base that I can push into the soil. And so this one here, I'm going to separate it right there. This one right here, it should be good for a couple of cuttings, and so I'm going to take this one and cut it right about there. Again, we're paying attention to what's top and bottom here, so I'm setting them with the bottoms down. That's important when you're making cuttings. Alright, this guy here, cut him there. This one, cut him here. This one there. This one right here. This one right here. And I'm going to leave that one whole. Now, all I'm going to do with this is just kind of poke a hole down in here inside this medium. Push these cuttings down so they're secure in the pot. I'm going to do a whole group of cuttings in a single container. This conserves on soil, it conserves on space, it conserves on water. These do not need a lot of room in order to root. So we'll take them back out of the pots later on and divide them out into individual containers. Again, I warn you, do not get the sap on your finger like I just did right here. Okay, there we go. All the cuttings are struck. Now I'm going to take them outside, put them in a partially shaded area, put a little water in the pot to settle it down. Now this is a bucket full of cuttings that I struck back in February. Should be rooted pretty well. I see some signs of growth on top, so first thing I'm going to do is start to do some medium up here. And tip these out of their pot. There we go. Alright, so these are perfect. See, a little bit of growth on the top, a little bit started there. Really nice roots dangling from below. Now this took me from February to August. So it's about 6 months it takes to get these cuttings to strike here. See, now the next thing I'm going to do is I have some buckets here, gallon pots. I'm going to put them in individually that again have a mixture of coconut core, large chunk, and some Promix. Lift the mix a little bit so I can get the roots started in there. A little bit of the material over the top. There we go. It's going to take about another 6 months to get these to be a presentable plant that you might be able to sell, or big enough to take it and put it out into the field. For those of you who are not familiar with where vanilla comes from an orchid. It's the bean pod of this orchid. Makes a little yellow orchid flower. The only place in the world that has the pollinating insect is southern Mexico and Central America. And so anywhere else vanilla is grown, it has to be done by hand by human beings. Got some good root growth on this one. This is an epiphytic plant, means it grows in trees, and so you don't want to use a regular soil with this, nor do you need a whole lot of soil. There we are, fully transplanted. I'm going to take them outside, put them into a partially shaded location, put some water down into the pots to settle things down. You can see here, if you look closely, that I really only filled these pots half to 2/3 of the way up. Again, this is an epiphytic plant, tree-growing plant. Does not require large amounts of soil. The soil is just there, kind of keep a little moisture around for it in between the rains and to hold the plant upright. I'm leaving this space in the pot because it helps shelter this cutting so that it will probably take off and grow a little bit better with the pot around it to keep the sun off the bottom and to keep the moisture in the container. I've positioned the pots on the eastern side of my nursery benches, stuck just under the edge. Now, this is going to accomplish a couple of things. One, that they will be partially shaded, getting mostly only morning light, but shade in the afternoon when it's hot, which is what they're going to want. And it'll catch the moisture that falls from the pots above when I'm watering. So we kind of get a double value out of our moisture. But now I'm going to go ahead and water these in. That's all there is to it. As simple as vanilla custard.